A Jeffersonian Democracy from 1800 to 1820 by John Schellenberger and Kyle Fairbanks. Enlightenment Thinker and Inspirations. The presidents during this time period followed the philosophies of the Enlightenment thinker John Locke. Locke's main philosophies were a people-driven government with a small central government to avoid an overpowering of the people. During the Jeffersonian era, political leaders focused on allowing states to make decisions rather than federal government. In an excerpt from an article in the U.S. History in Context, it reads, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe all were hostile to federally sponsored internal improvements, as Madison showed when he vetoed a renewal of bank charters in 1811 and an act to build a canal across New York State in 1817, one of his last actions in office. Jefferson's most fundamental political belief was absolute acquiescence in the decisions of the majority. Jefferson also believed in the will of the people and how elections provided the most appropriate guidance for directing a republic. These values were portrayed by presidents vetoing bills that would allow the federal government to put in internal improvements to states and rather leaving these internal improvements up to the states. Jefferson's idea was that the United States should run on small, self-sufficient, family-raised farms. Jefferson fantasized that each region would have its own specialty: rice, cotton, and tobacco plantations in the South, grain and livestock farms in the mid-Atlantic states, and lumber yards and fisheries in the North. Jefferson believed that this would minimize intercourse with foreign countries. During the Jeffersonian era, the government's goal was to remain small while still having control. The presidents would try and keep the government out of state issues and even keep the army small yet capable. Jefferson aimed at a different form of reform, which was to reduce state taxes and national debt. He disagreed with the Federalists under John Adams and George Washington. He cut off federal jobs and the size of the military to reduce debt and reduce spending. Also, he focused on abolishing slavery. Lastly, Jefferson wanted to establish a national bank that would lend money to capitalists. This would allow the economy to grow more effectively and efficiently. America during this time attempted to have peace and friendship with other countries. Their goal was not to have alliances with other countries, but rather to keep peace with all countries in an attempt to maintain independence. Jefferson's foreign policy objective was to protect U.S. independence by maintaining peace, but avoiding alliances with foreign nations. To this end, Jefferson initially set out to recall all U.S. diplomats from their foreign posts. He also hoped to acquire the port city of New Orleans at the mouth of the Mississippi River in Louisiana, ensuring farmers west of the Appalachian Mountains a place to launch their goods into internal trade. These objectives were part of Jefferson's overall plan to see the United States develop into a self-sufficient nation of farmers. That quote is from the U.S. History in Context. During this time, the U.S. had one tension with another country, and this was Tripoli due to its dispute of free international waters. The economy in America during this time period was an agricultural-based national economy. For example, the U.S. farmers grew tobacco, cotton, and sugar mainly in the southern colonies. The U.S. traded with other countries in order to allow their economy to grow and thrive. These countries were Great Britain, Spain, and France. Even though the U.S. traded with these countries, their goal was still not to form alliances, but rather just to keep peace and help their economy thrive. What was the state of the United States economy during this time? The United States economy was thriving, shown by the population growth that doubled to more than 10 million people during this time. Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory along the Mississippi River, which was key in expanding the economy of the U.S. because it allowed for more trade and further exploration westward. The 12th Amendment was ratified in 1804 due to the election crisis in 1800. In an excerpt from an article in the U.S. History and Context, it says, in 1800, they, meaning Jefferson and Adams, faced each other again, and Jefferson's people organized well, leading to an equal number of electoral votes for Jefferson and for his expected Vice President Aaron Burr. The election did go to the House, and the constitutional crisis resulted when the representatives deadlocked. The 12th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1804, which separates electoral college voting for the two offices, was the result. The 12th Amendment gives the procedures for electing a new president. This helped avoid a crisis like the 1796 and 1800 election. During Jefferson's presidency, he and Congress tried to reverse some of the laws implemented by the Federalists in the term before. Congress acted aggressively to implement his agenda for reversing Federalist policies. Congress repealed the Alien Act of 1798, limiting the naturalization of immigrants, while Jefferson pardoned the Republicans who had been convicted under the Sedition Act of 1798. Three major events during this time period were the Louisiana Purchase, the Tripolitan War, and the slave trade. The Louisiana Purchase impacted the United States in a positive way, while the Tripolitan War and the slave trade impacted the United States negatively. The slave trade and Louisiana Purchase showed that the president wanted change and would do what was right for the people. Although the South opposed the abolishment of the slave trade, Jefferson applied Enlightenment philosophies to the country's mindset in order to abolish the slave trade. He knew that the slave trade wasn't right, and even though the abolishment of the slave trade temporarily hurt their economy, he would think of other plans for the economy. The Louisiana Purchase was very wise and was backed by the people because that would mean they were the main power in North America, and it expanded the U.S. land. In an excerpt from the Thomas Jefferson administration from the Gale Group database, it reads, passing legislation to abolish the slave trade from Africa aroused sectional debates that foreshadowed later divisions between the North and South. Even though the abolishment of the slave trade later led to the separation between the North and South, it was still the right move for the U.S. due to the Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke. The political actions by the government back in the Jeffersonian era set a framework for a small federal government that tried as hard as it could to stay out of the matters that could be resolved by the states. The reason that Jefferson and the other presidents attempted to shrink the federal government was to try and stay away from a potential overpowering central government. Before this time period, the political atmosphere was one of turmoil and power-hungry men. During the Jeffersonian time period, this changed and the people began to respect and trust the government. This time period provided a backbone for the U.S. to grow and prosper. The presidents and Congress wanted a small federal government while still being able to keep power and help the nation grow. Today, the federal government is more involved in the lives of people, but is still trying to stay out of the people's lives like before. We believe that the politicians from the Jeffersonian era would want the federal government to shrink today and allow for more free choice from the people.